Okay, everybody. Thanks for being here again. I think this is session number 5 for our seminars this summer, and I know by looking at your faces, some of you have been to our first 2 sessions, and we're so thankful you're here today. We have a special treat for you, and I'm going to introduce to you Shirley Young. So, thinking straight when dementia comes. Let me tell you a bit about our speaker today. Shelley Young is Program Manager for Alzheimer Association North Central Texas Chapter, and she's been there for 18 years. Master of Science in Gerontology from ACU, Abilene Christian University. That's in Abilene. Worked for seniors for over 25 years. What is a senior? 55 plus or 65? I don't know. But I'm a senior, and you are too. Worked in assisted living, nursing facilities, and home care. Ms. Young's mother suffered from Alzheimer's for 10 years. Her father suffered from Lewy body dementia, which she'll be explaining that. I don't know what that is, but we'll find out here in a little bit. But we're so glad you're here. Can we welcome our speaker today, Shelley Young?
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. So first, I wanted to just start. I am passing these around. These are just sign-in sheets. And because a lot of our work is grant funded, they ask for at least a name and a zip code. If you want to give me more information than that, I can get you on our mailing list and you can get bombarded with all sorts of solicitations. I'm happy to do that for you. Also an email. We do send out a weekly e-news. It's just a little newsletter. So if you want to get more information from us, feel free to give me that more contact info for you. So that is not what I wanted to do. There we go. Okay, so I've been with the Alzheimer's Association for 18 years, as was mentioned, and I've learned a lot along the way, but the most commonly asked question I get is, what's the difference in Alzheimer's and dementia? So I really want to dive into that tonight and give you some information that I hope will be helpful to you. But tell me, who in this room has been impacted by any type? Has had a loved one, a family member, a close friend? So pretty much everywhere I go, it's at least 80 to 90% of the audiences that I talk to have some personal experience or knowledge of Alzheimer's. So the Alzheimer's Association has actually been around. We were formed in 1980, and we were started as a caregiver support organization. And since we were launched, we've become much more than that. So we are the largest private funder of Alzheimer's research in the U.S. We do a great deal of advocacy work, trying to improve the life of people impacted at even a state and federal level, hoping to impact even some of the regulations around nursing home care and things like that. We also do still a great deal related to direct dementia care and even helping professionals learn more about what good dementia care is, educating physicians, nurses, even going into health systems such as a major like hospital system and things like that. I love the work that I do because I really like to work with people. I like to help people, and just proud to be able to represent the organization. One thing I'd like to draw your attention to in our mission statement is that we've updated this in recent years, but we lead the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementia. So don't think that if you are concerned for a loved one, don't think that a person has to have quote Alzheimer's diagnosis to get help from us. A lot of people sadly never even get a diagnosis, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But if you are concerned for a friend or a loved one, or you need help, please give us a call. Please know that we are here to help you. So this is why I get up every day and do what I do. So that is Mom and Dad, also known as Mama and Papa, Ed and Carolyn, to their friends. So that is a photograph of my parents. And my mom was about 8 or 9 years into her Alzheimer's journey in this photograph. And my dad actually had those changes occurring in his brain related to the dementia that he had, but you can't see it really for either of them. I mean, you might, if you had interacted with my mom around the time of this photograph, you would have probably thought, yeah, something's not something's not quite right. But, dementia is not necessarily something that we can see when we look at our loved ones. But those changes are occurring in the brain and literally destroying brain cells. So this was taken on my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And so I love it. I think it's a sweet photograph. So there are a lot of things out there that can cause us to have memory problems, confusion, cognitive decline. But most of these things are treatable. So one thing, we know that if somebody is not well hydrated or they're not eating properly, that can affect their brain function. We also know that sometimes if someone is not taking their medication properly, particularly over-medicating, that can affect their cognition. Metabolic changes, a chemical imbalance, even excessive use, or I should say abuse, of alcohol can cause cognitive challenges. And then sometimes people who have a severe depression, maybe they're really experiencing intense grief due to the loss of a loved one or some other major life experience or trauma. Sometimes those individuals will not be functioning at as high a level as they had previously. And so this can manifest a lot with even things like apathy and just not really caring, which are also symptoms of dementia. One, any healthcare workers in here? Any nurses in this room? Yeah, yes. So who knows about urinary tract infections? Oh, yeah. Or some of you have had loved ones who had a UTI. And I'll tell you, people act weird with urinary tract infections. Even people who don't have dementia can become confused. And I still remember so distinctly a lady I used to work with when I worked in the nursing home. And she had been pretty functional and able to take care of herself. And I mean, just all of a sudden she woke up one day and she was not okay. And the family took her to the doctor. It was a urinary tract infection. And guess what? That's treatable. So I kind of like to start with this slide because it helps people to know that there are some things out there, and maybe one of the main reasons to try to get a diagnosis for a loved one is, what if it's not dementia? What if there's something that can be treated? I'm not saying all these things are necessarily easy to treat, but there are treatments for many of these. But then another thing that we know that causes cognitive loss is disease. So I probably should have switched a couple of slides around. So again, the biggest question I get asked is, what's the difference in Alzheimer's and dementia? So dementia is a condition. Dementia is this umbrella term that is referring to cognitive loss. And so people who have dementia will often, but not always, have memory loss. But they may have trouble with language. They may have trouble with problem solving and thinking abilities. And these are things that are severe enough to interfere with daily life. And so what we see with these two is that as they progress, then they start to manifest in changes in a person's behavior and their ability to function. So dementia is the global umbrella term. And then there are many different types or causes of dementia. And I've read that there are upwards of 100 different illnesses that can cause dementia. But we're just going to focus on a few right now. So Alzheimer's is the most common type or cause of dementia. So they estimate around 70% of people who have dementia of the Alzheimer's type. But there are some other illnesses or causes of dementia. So for some people, they may have a history of stroke. And so over time, especially even like your mini strokes, TIAs, that I'm sure some of you are familiar with, those can have almost like a compounding effect. They cut off the blood flow to the brain for a period of time. And then people who have had that experience may sometimes develop vascular dementia. There's also a type of dementia called Lewy body dementia. Some of you may have heard of that, not just because it was mentioned a couple of minutes ago, but that is the type that the actor Robin Williams had. So it came out after he died, that he was dealing with Lewy body dementia. And so one of the hallmarks of Lewy body is that those individuals will often have hallucinations, and they can be very troubling. And hallucinations are not just visual. Usually when we talk about hallucinations, we're talking about something that a person sees or thinks they see. But it can even be sometimes you can have auditory hallucinations, or you can smell things that aren't there, and that can be very problematic for the person impacted by it. Also, Lewy body is one of the dementias that tends to really mess with a person's sleep. And so I know someone right now who has a diagnosis of Lewy body, and his sleep, I mean, he just gets a few hours of sleep a night. So he's up at all different times of the night doing activities, and because he'd rather be busy than just laying there miserable, that he's having trouble with his sleep. Also, frontotemporal dementia is one that's in the news quite a bit right now, and that is a type that the actor Bruce Willis has, and it was actually disclosed just in the last couple of weeks that his wife has now moved him into a care facility. But frontotemporal dementia is one that doesn't automatically manifest with memory loss, but we may see personality changes in that individual. They may not make good choices, and so there are nuances and differences in all of the different types of dementia, and it is really helpful to seek a diagnosis, but also know that a lot of these different types of dementia will have overlap, because people with Alzheimer's can have hallucinations, but we also know people with Lewy body can have hallucinations. So just know that it's not always really simple or really clean, and it can be hard for physicians to determine which type of dementia a person may have. I like this photograph. So the left side, that cross-section of a brain, that's a healthy brain. And then the right side is an Alzheimer's brain. And so you can see differences in color, in structure, in size, and literally with an Alzheimer's brain, the brain cells are dying. And so that tends to happen in a fairly typical progression. With Alzheimer's, we see most frequently first memory loss, an unusual memory loss. So with my mother, that was a memory loss where she would literally sit in the same conversation and repeat herself over and over and over and over and over. And so I very distinctly remember when that happened for the first time. I was eating lunch with her. And thankfully, the thing that she was reliving or sharing over and over again was a really pleasant memory and thought for her. But that's kind of a telltale. So some of the things that we know specifically impacted by Alzheimer's disease. Again, number one, we talked about that memory loss that disrupts daily life. But I like to cover these because a lot of people think, oh, it's just memory. And it's so much more than that. So I'd like to dive into these just a little bit. So we see number two, challenges in planning and problem solving. So that one could manifest, for instance, in someone who is living at home and maybe all of a sudden their electricity is turned off. Well, it turns out they weren't really able to manage the task of paying bills and balancing a checkbook anymore. And for most of us, those are simple tasks, not all. I've known some people along the way that just could never get it together and balance a check. But for most of us, those are some pretty basic tasks. Difficulty completing familiar tasks in the home. Certainly we saw this with my mom. She was a homemaker. She stayed home after my brother was born. And so, she did the laundry. She did the cooking. She did the dishes. And we would catch her doing things like forgetting to put soap in the wash, or maybe putting the dirty laundry in the dryer, or just some things like she was trying so hard to do what was right, and obviously parts of her brain were still working, but then parts weren't working so well. Confusion with time and place. This is a really big one because people are still driving often and they're no longer able to find their way. You know, they get in the car to go to church, a place they've been literally thousands of times in their life, and all of a sudden the road isn't familiar. The place that they're going doesn't feel right or familiar to them, and they can't get there. And sometimes we see people even getting confused in their own home. Confused again. If you've ever known anyone who had Alzheimer's, you'll know that they tend to go backwards in time. And so, you know, like you could even ask them, "Oh, well, how old are you?" And they might tell you they're 20 when in reality they're 80. So there's this real often intense confusion with time and place. So number 5 is one of my favorites because I get to demo for you. Okay. So I want everybody to put on your binoculars. So as a person advances with their Alzheimer's, what happens is their peripheral vision narrows, and as it gets more advanced, they have binocular vision. And then at the end, they may have monocular vision, where it looks like they're just looking out of one. And if you've ever visited a loved one, and this made so much sense to me when I heard this. You know, like my mom lived in the nursing home. I worked in a nursing home. And how often have I seen people reach across the dining table and try to eat somebody else's food or take a drink out of their tea or drink their coffee? And some of it may just be because they're ornery and they like chocolate cake. But some of it may be that they literally don't see their plate. Because if I have binocular vision, I don't see my plate, but guess whose I see? My neighbor across the table. So I thought that was so interesting. But this also is dangerous, especially if somebody is still driving, because their peripheral vision is impacted. So they may not have a good feel for how close they are to other objects on the road. So that's one that I think driving, I mean, we could talk about that for hours, but that's an issue that I think needs to be addressed early. That's just my personal opinion. Number 6, new problems with words in speaking or writing. You might ask a person with Alzheimer's, what is this? Well, most of you would say it's a cup, but a person with Alzheimer's might have a hard time coming up with the word. That word finding is challenging, but they would probably describe it. They'd say, well, you put liquid in it, or you drink out of it, or they'd give you some other description. So, you know, these are highly intelligent people who are doing the best they can. And so that's where you start to see it manifest, as in things like their communication, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. We all do that sometimes. But if I lay my keys down, like just when I came in here, I had to have my keys to get here. I had to drive to get here. So they are somewhere between my car and where I'm standing right now. But a person with Alzheimer's is likely not going to be able to retrace their steps. We know that decreased or poor judgment is a big part of this illness, and so it's really frustrating. If you are a caregiver and you have deep concern for their well-being and their safety, you may want them to give up those keys. You may want them to stop driving, but to try to have a reasonable conversation with them can be very difficult. They're losing that ability for reasoning. My favorite example of this one, and I think it actually happened somewhere here in Parker County years ago, we had a client, the daughter was her mom's caregiver. Mom had Alzheimer's. And she went to visit her mom one day, and mom had purchased a side of beef. Now, I know those of you in this room know a side of beef is big. I mean, this was a single woman, probably in her 80s. She wasn't taking care of anybody. She wasn't feeding the ranch hands. She did not need a side of beef. And she may have not even had a place to store it. You know, it's not like you can just put it in the the little bitty freezer at the top of your fridge. You know, you need a deep freezer too out in the garage. So that's one of my favorite examples. But in the moment that she purchased it and that she accepted delivery, it made sense to her. It was a good decision. Then we also see changes in personality, in mood, withdrawal from social activities. My mom went to church 3 times a week and ladies' Bible class on Tuesday morning. So she started withdrawing from those activities, and those were really important to her. She had grown up in the church that they were going to at the time. And so for her to be kind of disinterested in those activities was a big deal. I think some of it was she didn't remember people, and she just didn't feel really comfortable in that environment that before had been so nurturing and wonderful. And her friends, people were still good to her, but she wasn't feeling comfortable in that moment. In the past, when I first started with the association, we used to say that there were 7 stages of Alzheimer's, and we would break it down pretty carefully. And I don't find that that's the case anymore. I don't find that most doctors use that language. I still sometimes will run into people who will come up to me and say, well, mom is stage 5 or mom is stage whatever, but then they describe her behavior or that person, what they're doing, and it's like, that doesn't even jive for me. So now mostly we just hear mild, moderate, and severe. And what we see in the mild stages, it becomes pretty obvious that there are some cognitive challenges there. So again, that memory loss can be pretty obvious. That sometimes it can be masked pretty well, but that person's ability just to kind of function in their environment on a daily basis just becomes harder for them. They're more challenged in that. But then as a person moves into the more moderate stages, you certainly see increased forgetfulness and challenges with their thinking and reasoning. But this is also where we started to see a lot of changes with my mom in terms of her ability to manage her own personal care. So for instance, you couldn't just tell her that she needed to take a bath, but you'd have to go with her and kind of show her and help her pick out clothes, and then even make sure that she was doing things like using soap or shampoo or toothpaste on the toothbrush and those kind of things. And so this is where I feel like a lot of caregivers really struggle, is when they're standing in the gap now and they're doing so much more physically. Like they're already dealing with this emotional trauma of kind of losing their loved one over time, slowly but surely. And now they're having to do more to physically support that person. And it's also very common that as we move into the more moderate stages that people will become incontinent. And that is one of the biggest challenges that I feel like people face. And honestly, that was the thing that really, I think, sent my dad over the edge. He finally just couldn't handle it anymore because it was, changing diapers multiple times a day, but also sometimes changing sheets a couple of times during the night, and just managing the different aspects of that incontinent care. And then the late stages, a person is severely disoriented, probably is not recognizing family and friends any longer. My mom was nonverbal. Even in that picture that I showed you of her, she was talking. She wouldn't make any sense. What she had to say was just really kind of gibberish most of the time. Every now and then she'd come out with a zinger. One time they had taken her to the beauty shop and they washed her hair, but they didn't style it. And she looked at herself in the mirror and she said, I look like a slop bucket. And that is totally, that's the kind of thing that's what my mom would say. She saw somebody that didn't look very nice or, wasn't fixed up. She'd talk about them being a slop bucket. And so that was such a mom thing to say. But for the most part, she wasn't really verbal anymore. And so then we just see everything becomes more difficult, harder, more enhanced. My mom was not walking in the late stages. She was completely bedbound, completely dependent on someone else to care for her, to feed her. Every aspect of her care was dependent on the nursing staff at the nursing home. So that's kind of the typical progression, but there's even variability within that. Like I talked a minute ago about how people in the early stages will, their memory is one of the first things that we notice, and it's typically the short-term memory, but then their long-term memory is more intact. But even my mom's short-term memory seemed impacted pretty early. So I think all these things help us to kind of understand and give us an idea of this is the roadmap, this is what is reasonable to expect, but it can vary greatly from person to person. So what are the steps for getting a diagnosis? In a perfect world, we catch it either in ourselves or our loved ones early. And we go to the doctor. What we did with our family, my parents had been seeing the same physician, their primary care doc, for many, many years. So they went to him, Dr. Jordan, and he did some assessments. He did a thorough history. And he actually, with her, he already had all this information. So in terms of like a thorough history and physical, he already had the history. He knew the history. But it's good to do blood tests and urine tests because, let's think back to we were talking a minute ago about that urinary tract infection and how that can manifest and cause people to appear to be confused. And so he did all those things. He actually did, there's a cognitive screening test that a lot of doctors will do. There's different tools, I should say. So one is called the MMSE, and there's some different ones, but they have about 30 questions on them usually. And so the doctor can ask things like that help him determine a person's, not just their memory, but their orientation. And it'll be things like even like what month is it, or what year are we in, who's the president of the United States. And so those are things that most people would know. In Texas, it's a little iffy because like if you ask what season it is, I mean, who knows? But most of us would be able to answer those questions pretty easily. And then our doctor also assessed my mom for depression because remember, depression can sometimes mimic dementia, and depression is treatable. So he did all these things, and then he made a referral for us to a neurologist. And so the neurologist did again, kind of a physical exam and just wanted to, kind of look her over, and even checked things like balance, and sent her for an MRI. And so the MRIs don't pick up the dementia, but they can help to identify if there's something else going on. So if a person maybe has a tumor, or even there's a condition out there called normal pressure hydrocephalus, and that is where there is fluid on the brain. And so that fluid can generally be drained. And so you may not see a full recovery, but those individuals can get a lot better. So much of what they're doing in trying to diagnose any type of dementia is a process of elimination. We want to make sure it's not something else. And once they've determined it's not something else, then one of the tools in the toolbox is what's called, and I should have included it in this slide, it's called neuropsych assessment. And so that's where you go and you'll speak to these are generally PhD clinicians, and they'll spend a couple of hours with you or your loved one asking lots of questions, and those questions help them to tease out what type of dementia it might be. And apparently, and I don't understand this, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a neuropsychologist, but apparently they can, they'll pick up on the nuances of the different dementias and how they may be impacting the brain. And so that's one of the really helpful tools in the toolbox. And we encourage people to try to get an accurate diagnosis. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's hard to find an accurate diagnosis. And it's not because the doctors aren't smart or they don't care or they don't listen, but sometimes it's difficult to tease that out. But it's really helpful to try to get an accurate diagnosis because, for one thing, it helps you to know what you're dealing with. It's beneficial, I think, because the dementias do manifest differently, and so the Alzheimer's that my mom had looked really different from the Lewy body dementia that my dad had. So some of the benefits of early diagnosis. One is, and I'm jump to the bottom for just a minute, and then go back up to the top, but related to getting that accurate diagnosis, there are some medications that are on the market now to treat Alzheimer's specifically. So you really want to have that accurate diagnosis so you can try to get the right medication. And we'll tease that out in a minute. But some other benefits of early diagnosis are just the legal and financial planning. A lot of people have already done that, but a lot haven't. And as a person progresses with their dementia, they become less and less capable of making decisions and being competent. And we want them to be able to tell us what they want and to make good decisions. You can also build your care team. And the care team can be made up of family members, can be made up of the pharmacist. And it's not like you have to sit down and write out specifically who your care team is, although some people do that. But just to know who are the people that are going to be here to help on this journey. Who can I call on? And it may be church friends. It may be neighbors. It may be the physician or the nurse at the physician's office who is so helpful whenever you call. But to just sit down and kind of figure out who's going to be on that care team and who can you depend on. I also think there's a real benefit to the early diagnosis and being able to talk to the person with the dementia and to talk about, well, where, if you reach a point, and this may or may not happen, but if you reach a point where you can't really express your wishes to me anymore, where do you want to live? Do you want Martha or Mary to take care of you? Also think when it comes to driving is such a big issue and it's such a safety issue. So I really encourage folks, if the person with dementia is still driving and they're still safe to drive, then this is a time to sit down and say, hey, do I have your permission when I perceive it's not safe anymore to take the keys? Because that person is going to lose capacity to make good choices. Their reasoning ability is diminished. And so sometimes I know families that will sit down and talk about it early and basically get permission. Sometimes they'll even write it down. They will write out a contract, a driving contract, that I say you can take the keys when I'm no longer safe to drive. And there may be some other issues depending on the family, maybe some business things too that need to be discussed. But early diagnosis gives us time to talk about this stuff and to plan. I am happy to answer questions, by the way, but I wanted to wait till the end because so often I answer the questions in the course of the presentation. So we will, I think, have plenty of time for that. So this is just a big, long list of medications. Aricept, Exelon, and Razidine all work in the same fashion. And those meds have been around for over 20 years. And they do not treat Alzheimer's, they treat symptoms. So think of it in this way. Think if you have arthritis and you take a pain med, that pain med is not treating the arthritis, that pain med is treating the symptom, which is pain. And so the Alzheimer's medications that we've had for many, many years are like that. And they are most beneficial if we catch it early and we start the medications early. Not everyone tolerates them well. The biggest issues with them tend to be GI upset, but I have heard of people having other, less known symptoms. But that's what we've had in the toolbox for over 20 years. So the good news is there are some new medications that have come out in the last 4 years or so that have received FDA approval. They are not the be-all and end-all. They don't cure it. And they don't improve it for everyone. But there are some people who have really seen improvement when they take these medications. So one is called Leqembi. And the other one is called Kisunla. And the thing that makes these different is that they are able to cross the blood-brain barrier, and they go into the brain, and they help to clear out an abnormal buildup of protein that we call Alzheimer's. So in Alzheimer's brain, what we see happening is, for whatever reason, there are naturally occurring proteins all throughout our brain. Our body uses them for all different kinds of reasons. But for some reason in the Alzheimer's brain, those proteins are generally in a healthy person are used, and then the body clears them out, just sloughs them off, and they clear out. But in Alzheimer's brain, those proteins are building up. And so what these new meds are doing is they're helping to clear out the protein. So they actually do treat the Alzheimer's. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. And so again, not everybody sees benefit from them, but there are some people who have seen true benefit. None of these medications actually will prolong a person's life, because I hear people say that a lot. Well, I don't want her on them because I'm not trying to prolong it. It's like, well, I'm not trying to prolong it either. But if we can give quality of life to that person, then that also benefits us as caregivers. I mean, if they're happier and they're doing better, then we're probably happier and doing better too. But these medications are not about prolonging life. And so the good news is there are other medications in the pipeline that also show promise. And so we're really hopeful for what that may mean in the coming years. And then the good news is, well, what if we could maybe identify people early before symptoms start? What if we could start medication early? So, this opens all sorts of doors. Right now, the door that's open is there is a group of people who benefit from these medications, and we want them to take advantage. But these medications, the last two, are only approved for people who have early stage Alzheimer's. And so again, then we're back to, we want to make sure we're getting an accurate diagnosis, because these are not intended to treat the other dementias. Donnie, how am I doing on time? Okay. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and I want to talk briefly. So I think some of the biggest challenges for caregivers are just how to manage what's in front of us. And there's not always easy answers. You can't medicate everything that your loved one is doing. You don't want to medicate everything that they're doing because medications have side effects. A lot of people are like, well, I don't want to give them those medications because I don't want them to just sit in a chair all day long. And I understand that. And so one of the things we have to do is try to understand, though, that they do have deficits, and then we need to learn to change our communication style when possible. And I personally, this is going to sound a little hokey, but I think good communication is as important, if not better, than medication for a person with Alzheimer's. Some of the things that we learn to do with them are we learn to validate what they're thinking and feeling, even when it's not accurate. Because, they'll come up with some kind of weird stuff. And so I used to work with a lady. I worked at a place in Fort Worth, and she called the police multiple occasions to tell them that somebody had stolen her red purse and her red shoes. And she called them one time and asked the police to come dust for prints. And they didn't dust for prints, but I think at least twice the police came to our building to try to figure out what was going on. And so you're not going to convince people that their red purse and their red shoes are not missing. Sometimes you can actually go into their room with their permission and maybe help them find the items that they probably hid from themselves. But a lot of what we need to do with our loved ones is just validate them, because even if what they're saying and thinking isn't even true, trying to reason with them isn't going to work. And so most of us, if we have a problem and we go to a friend, we don't necessarily want that person to try and fix it and tell us all the reasons why it's not true. We want to be validated. We want to listen. And so I think one of the best things you can do as a caregiver is just to learn to say, wow, I am so sorry. That must be really frustrating. I'm so sorry you feel that way. What can I do to help? What can I do to help? What can I do to help? And so in that moment, hopefully, because they can become very agitated, they can become angry. And so let's try to bring the temperature down and just validate what they're feeling. And then we need to look at the next step as how do we distract them? How do we move them on to the next thing so that they don't stay stuck in this rut? Because they get stuck in ruts. Their brains don't turn off. And so they fixate on things. So how do we move them at least to a more healthy fixation, one that's potentially not going to be harmful to them or to us? And we could do a whole lesson just on distraction, redirecting, and communication, and we don't have time for that. So I like for people to kind of look when their loved ones are acting in ways that they don't understand or that are frustrating to them, is sometimes we can look at that as an unmet need. Like a lot of folks in my world, we use the term challenging behavior. But they're not trying to be difficult. They're doing the best they can. And they often are feeling, sometimes it's physical, sometimes maybe there is pain or discomfort that they no longer have the language to describe. And sometimes they're not feeling safe. Now, it may not be that they think, oh, somebody's going to come at me with a knife. It's not that clear. But for whatever reason, they're just not comfortable in the space they're in. And so anything we can do to help them feel more comfortable is going to be a positive thing. I'm trying to decide if I should keep going with this. So I think what I want to do is I'm just going to jump to the end real quick and then give us time for some Q&A. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the Alzheimer's Association is largely about caregiver support. And so some of the things that I want you to know. So everyone, I hope, received a copy of the brochure titled Understanding Alzheimer's and Dementia. And if you flip that over on the back, you are going to find our 24/7 helpline. And if you are currently a caregiver, that is one of maybe the single best tool that you have. So you could literally leave here right now, go sit in your car and call the helpline. And that line is staffed with care consultants. The people who work that line are master's level social workers and counselors. And so they are able to provide almost in the moment care and support to you and coaching. So if you have a loved one who is incontinent, they can talk to you about that. This is what they do all day, every day. You have a loved one who is still driving and they shouldn't be. They can talk to you about that. You need to find a doctor. They can help you with that. They have access to a nationwide database. They can also tell you about local services. I do not have a support group that meets here in Springtown. We do have one that meets in Weatherford. We also have one in Lido. And they can pull that information up based on zip code, tell you what's close. They can tell you if there are education programs in the area. But it's really that support, that care and support that they can provide that I think is so beneficial. And sometimes it's a very specific problem. For those of you who've been down this road, you know that people with dementia, they don't like to bathe. Getting them to take a bath is sometimes a nightmare. And for years, there's actually been a curriculum. I don't know who wrote it, but there was a curriculum out there called Bathing Without a Battle. And so these are the kinds of things that our helpline consultants can help with. And sometimes it's really more emotional support that you need as a caregiver. But I encourage you to reach out to the helpline. And there's no charge for that. That is just a service that we provide. And if you call them at 3 a.m, guess what? They're there. There are people who are staffing that line. Also, we do free education, and I'm happy to come to groups like this here at the church, but I do a lot with like Rotary clubs and Lions clubs and even care facilities. I do some education with them to try to help the staff better understand what's happening with the people that they care for. We have about 20 support group meetings a month that we host through my office. And again, I mentioned that we have one in Weatherford, one in Aledo, but I also have some virtual groups. So if it's difficult for you to get out, maybe you can't leave your loved one, then have a couple of groups that might work for you. So please utilize those services. We do have we're right in the middle of fundraising season for the Alzheimer's Association, and we have our Walk to End Alzheimer's that there are actually 600, I think, locations across the United States that will be hosting a walk. And we have one coming up in Weatherford on, I think it's September 27th. So if you're interested in getting information on that, you can actually call the helpline and they can give you more info on that. So questions, comments? Yes. So I brought, up here on this front table, I brought a variety of brochures from my office. I have one on safety, one on caregivers taking care of themselves, one on behaviors, some of my business cards, and then information on activities that promote a healthy brain. So I welcome you to come up here and grab some of these and take them with you. Or if you have a friend who wasn't able to come tonight and you want them to have information, please take that. Questions, comments? I know I didn't cover it all. Yes, ma'am.
I've heard that music therapy is good to use for
She's asking about music therapy. That is true. Anything we can do that helps them to engage. And music is stored in a different part of the brain. And I'm not a scientist. I don't understand all the intricacies of the brain, but it's stored in a different part. And it's so interesting that you can have people who aren't even able to really, they're not speaking, they're not making sense when they speak, but they can sing a song. I suspect many of you have seen that. They'll sit down at the piano and they'll start to play and sing, or somebody else plays, and it's like they know every word of that song. It's just amazing. There's actually a documentary that it's probably about 10 years old now, but it's called Alive Inside. And I think you can even just find it on probably YouTube. But it was a scientist who made playlists for people in nursing homes of the music that they loved. And so there's this one man who loved jazz. And I mean, he appeared to be almost comatose until they put the headphones on him and he started hearing that music. And I mean, it's like they come alive. It's fascinating. So yeah, so music, but even things like art, and they don't have to be artists to enjoy or engage with the art. Even sometimes things as simple as just helping in the kitchen, like maybe chopping if they're safe to use a knife, chopping vegetables for a meal, things like that. But things, because I think we were created to have purpose, and we all need that even as the dementia progresses. And so people who are able to help their loved ones find those activities, even something as simple as raking or sweeping, folding towels, that's purpose. Yes, ma'am.
what is the relationship with dementia and Parkinson's?
So that is a great question. Parkinson's is a totally separate disease, but people who develop Parkinson's can develop dementia. And now, and I'm not going to be able to explain this appropriately or as well as I'd like, but we talked about Lewy body dementia, and they actually lump Lewy body and Parkinson's now under kind of their own separate umbrella, but those are both illnesses that cause dementia. You're shaking your head. Are you? Okay. Yeah. So I don't know why a lot of the neurological diseases, it seems like they also have, people will develop dementia, and I'm not sure what that is about. Oh yeah, no, it absolutely is. Yeah, no, people with Parkinson's disease will often, not all, but they will often develop dementia.
Dementia symptoms were so far accelerated with Parkinson was. His death
Yeah.
certificate said Parkinson, but the dementia was full-blown.
Right.
It was delusions, it was
Yeah.
not knowing it was
Yeah.
that, it was,
Yeah.
knowing me. It
Right.
was-
Yeah. Well, it kind of makes sense. So here's what I would say to that. Parkinson's is the disease that caused dementia. So it makes sense to me that on a death certificate it would say he died from Parkinson's. Because the dementia is a symptom of the Parkinson's.
So which one do you treat first? Do you treat Parkinson's symptoms, or do you concentrate on dementia?
It really depends, I think, on the individual. So typically with Parkinson's, we see that their difficulty with movement manifests first. So we're going to start trying to deal with the movement challenges, whether rigidity or tremor. And then as the dementia, or when they develop dementia, then that's up to the doctor as to how they try to treat the dementia.
We saw more dementia issues.
Yeah.
than Parkinson's.
Yeah.
No movement issues.
Yeah.
He was leaving the house, put child locks on the
Right.
doors because he could be
Yeah.
down the street before I ran.
Right. Yeah.
So it was just, it's just, I don't know. Lung disease is actually causing increase in the
Right.
disease that
Yeah.
runs.
Yeah, so technically, although you'll hear us say this a lot, technically dementia is not a disease. It's all these other things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lewy body. Those are the diseases that are causing the dementia. But it's very much up to the doctors how they choose to treat them. And like I said, in some cases, it's better that the way we deal with our loved ones through good communication can be, not always, but can be as beneficial as the medication. Yes, sir.
Medications to avoid. Hasn't research shown that there's certain medications over the counter that you should avoid?
So I think there is actually in the pharmacy world a list. It's called the Beers list. And I don't even know how, I mean, there's quite a few medications on there, but though I think those are considered to be medications that just generally shouldn't be given as we get older. And then you have to just look at the effects of all these different medications. I mean, you have to really take it on a case-by-case basis. But so many of the medications that we use can cause drowsiness, can cause a person to be even more disinterested, can cause dizziness. And so, we know people with dementia often are already older, and we can see changes with their gait and their stability, their ability to walk that changes. And so we're not wanting to give the medications that are potentially having a sedating effect. But here's the thing, and don't pay attention to the medication. I think it's the med Seroquel, and there actually are others out there that even on the commercials on TV, they'll talk about, yeah, this is a great medication, but it can cause XYZ, including it's not recommended for people with dementia because people with dementia who take it have a higher risk of death. Well, nobody in their right mind is going to want to give mama a medication that's putting her at higher risk for death. But here's what I will say. I've known people that gave their loved ones Seroquel, and this is not about the specific medication, but just the concept. And it was like a godsend for them because it was the first time, in a very long time that for whatever reason that mama was able to calm down and kind of feel a little bit human again. So I think we have to be, I mean, we're the advocates. We have to be really cautious, and we have to speak up for them because they can't do it for themselves. We have to be the ones to ask questions. But sometimes the things seem a little counterintuitive. But, you know, if you've got somebody like my mom even who was going through a phase where she was waking up in the middle of the night, and then that's keeping the caregiver awake because my dad can't sleep when she's up and she's pacing. You know, sometimes you have to look at medications, and maybe, yeah, that person needs a sleep med, but we're going to put them on a lower dose of the sleep med. So there's a lot of monkeying around, I think, that goes with that.
What if, and this is, you know, a caregiver is over, because they, like you just said, they can't sleep, and so they're over-medicating their loved ones. It happens. I mean,
Yeah.
what do you do? I mean, you know, I know.
Yeah, I would say that that's a conversation with the caregiver. It's also a conversation with the doctor. But you know, that's a tough one to deal with. I mean, certainly, like I don't have the authority. I mean, I guess depending on the severity of it, you could do something like call Adult Protective Services if you really felt like this was a severe circumstance.
Person have to admit they've got it before they can get help?
That's a great question. He said, does a person have to admit they have it before they can get help? So here's the deal, is one of the symptoms of Alzheimer's at least, and I think your other dementias as well, is that they lack awareness. They lack insight. So often, not always, but often, they don't know that they're not okay. And so then it becomes just this incredible balancing act. And so that's when I would say, call our helpline. Call our helpline because everybody's situation is a little bit different. You know, like one of the things that worked with my mom sometimes would be to say, hey, Mom, because she lived for her kids. And so if I said, Mom, I want you to come to the bathroom with me and we need to change your diaper, she'd balk at that. She's not going for that. But if I told her, I said, hey, Mom, will you come help me? My mom would have done anything in the world for me. So sometimes you have to learn to finesse it a little bit. And so that happens with diagnosis. That happens with getting them to the doctor. Sometimes we don't tell them we're taking them to the doctor. We just take them. Sometimes we take them and then we go out for ice cream after or before or on both sides, before and after. You know, like it's just, and it's exhausting. I mean, that's what's so hard for us as caregivers because it's constantly changing and we're constantly having to figure out, well, where are they today? You know, how's she doing? Which side of the bed did she wake up on? You know, and again, it's not because they're trying to be difficult. It's just the nature of these different diseases that we're dealing with.
I've heard the saying, if you think you have it, probably
Yes, you know, I think there's some legitimacy to that. Yeah, and I mean, I have friends. I have one friend. Her mom. My friend is 70, and her mom had Alzheimer's, and so she'll tell me stuff a lot. She really worries about what might be wrong, and I don't see it. So, I mean, I think most of the time, if we're worried about it, we're probably not really having that issue. But I also say we know ourselves better than anyone. You know what's normal for you. You kind of know your baseline. And so if you think something is not quite right, you need to talk to your doctor. So one of the things that the Alzheimer's Association advocates for is that, and Medicare will pay for this, and a lot of insurance probably does too, depending on your age. For when you go in for your annual wellness visit, ask your doctor to start doing a cognitive screening on you every year. And that helps to establish a baseline. So if you go in one year and you're great, but then the next year, maybe things are, you know, you don't score in quite the same way that you did before. Doesn't mean you have dementia. Maybe there's something, though, that needs to be addressed. And if it is dementia, the meds that are in the market now are all known to be most beneficial when given early.
Then I guess this question may sound a little bit odd, but then when you're talking about Parkinson and you're talking about dementia,
Mm-hmm.
do you see a mental health provider then? Or do you see a regular doctor, or are they specialized doctors
Yeah.
that deal with the combination of it?
So that is not an odd question. Dementia is not considered a mental illness. All the different illnesses or the conditions that we talked about, like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, those are neurological disorders. They are not mental illness. And it depends sometimes on the individual who the best doctor to see is. It depends, I think, on the stage of the dementia and even the issue and how it's manifesting as to who you need to see. Typically, what I've experienced is that folks will go to their primary care physician and get referred to a neurologist, and they'll continue to see both, because while the neurologist may treat the dementia, you still need your primary care doc to treat everything else. I personally think that to choose a geriatrician is a great way to go. And so geriatricians are like pediatricians, except for they treat us when we get older. And they are generally going to be well-versed in all the different types of dementia, in those medications that are not encouraged as we get older. Like they have a skill set that your average doctor doesn't have. And we have some good geriatricians in Fort Worth. So.
Yeah, that's what I've never heard of one personally
Yeah.
in Fort Worth.
The geriatrician, so one thing you can do is you can call our 800 number, and they have access to that nationwide database. But I can tell you that the doctors, I think all of them probably, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the UNT Health Science Center in Fort Worth. They have a clinic there. It's called the Center for Older Adults. And I think all of their physicians are geriatricians. Sure. Yeah. So he was asking about genetics. So the single greatest risk factor, now I'm going to talk specifically about Alzheimer's because we know this information. The single greatest risk factor for developing Alzheimer's is age, not genetics. There is a genetic component for some people. You know, like I'm sure some of you have known people who maybe mom and then 2 or 3 siblings all had Alzheimer's. So it certainly appears that that runs in families, but still the single greatest risk factor is age. So, yeah, so most people, you really start to see people developing Alzheimer's around the age of 65 and older. My mom was 70, my aunt was 70. Yeah. We do see it in younger people, but not a lot. Yes.
You know, all this, my mother had severe dementia starting in the early 70s. She had to give up her CPA practice, and it was very difficult on the family. Anyway, I want to say this, I was just going to talk to you about it, but it's so positive, I'd like the whole group to get to hear this, because all this is very negative, very sad, and half of us may wind up one of the dementia people. I was driving my vehicle very recently, about a week ago, and it was actually AM 660, I think, and I was driving, so I couldn't write things down. But a medical doctor was being interviewed that worked for one of the large drug companies. It was at the end of the interview. I didn't get the name of the drug company, but the last part of it, they had been testing for several years a group of severely advanced dementia people, all right? And they were able to medically go into their brains and tell exactly how clogged up certain vessels were in their brain. They could tell which vessels and how much clog. Okay? Then this new drug, and it's a long word. It'd have to have 16 to 20 letters probably. I think it started with a T, very long word. And after, I think it's 2 years, they've been testing it per what the FDA required, that 80% of that group, when they retested, 90% of the vessels that had this calcium built up in it were completely clear. 90%. And not only could the people think, they could even remember things they hadn't been able to remember for years. And they were currently, at this time, in the process of talking to the FDA and trying to get this drug introduced on the market. It was the most positive breakthrough compared to these two drugs that are here. It's right now very, very, very modern, like right now. But it was just incredibly advanced beyond anything else they've had.
Have to go through the FDA.
Yeah.
They're dealing
Well-
with the FDA right now.
So I don't even have a way to speak to that. What you're saying, I mean, I have no context. I don't know the name of the drug. I don't know the person who was interviewed. It sounds like a scam to me, to be very honest with you. I don't know the or the station that you're talking about, but I would be very interested to hear more. But there is stuff that hits the market, or not market. There is stuff that hits the news every single day that is totally inaccurate. I'm not saying this was, but I can't even begin to speak to it because I don't know. I do think there's a lot of positive stuff happening in the dementia world, but here's the thing. The thing that we know right now, the best thing that we can do to prevent potentially or at least delay cognitive decline is just take care of ourselves. It's the stuff that we've been knowing and hearing forever. I mean, I remember back in the 80s when I first was really hearing more like about aerobic exercise, and it's just to eat well, to eat fewer processed foods, to move more, to engage in a healthy lifestyle. And that includes lifelong learning. That includes getting good sleep and all of those things. Like, I don't think there's this magic pill out there. That's my opinion. Like I said, I can't speak to it because I don't even know what it is that you're referencing. And there may be a magic pill someday, but I don't think we're there yet. Yes, sir.
I will be really quick, but I think the group needs to hear these. My wife was diagnosed with FTD 3 years ago. We're a full-time caregiver.
Right.
There's a great resource in Fort Worth. It's called James L. West. JamesLWest.org. They have lots of training classes, learning classes, lots of resources, 2 group meetings a week. It's all free. I would suggest if anybody's curious, go there.
Yeah.
The second one is called the Jim Nance Clinic, Alzheimer's Clinic, in Houston Methodist. They also do clinical trials. So a little bit further, my wife has been in a clinical trial for 25 months. That company, if I'm hearing correctly, is going to the FDA for approval because the drug is working. It has the genetic for it.
Right.
Neurologist, I stay away from community neurologists and get into university neurologists.
Yeah.
Because it's much different. The first diagnosis, they told me it was all psychiatric with my wife. It's like no. She has an MRI that shows degradation in her brain. PET scan at UT Southwest over in Dallas showed that she had a real problem.
Yeah. And don't feel like you have to go to Houston or you have to go to Dallas. There are good docs in Fort Worth. I don't know what's here really in Springtown. I suspect it's pretty limited. But don't feel like you have to go to UT Southwestern. And there are clinical trials happening in Fort Worth. I've been part of it's not even a clinical trial, clinical research that I've been part of. There's a lot of good stuff. So just don't feel like you have to go to some fancy clinic or fly, 400 miles away. I have business cards here. If you have any questions or want to, talk to me later or email me, please feel free to do that. So I appreciate your comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Shelley. There's one resource that I would encourage you to look at on this table. It's a single card. It's called 10 Healthy Habits for Your Brain. And it's pretty well self-explanatory, but it really is. I would encourage you to pick it up and think about what it says, okay?